Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, August the 12th, 2021. You may have heard me coughing a lot during this show for the last week or so, and I was beginning to get a little worried about it. And then I saw in the news today that there's a air quality alert for Vancouver Island, and then I realized what it was. Every summer there are massive forest fires in British Columbia, either on the island or on the main land, and the wind blows the smoke to where we are. So I feel a lot better now. And so now you know why I have been interrupting the show to cough. I wanted to begin with the most important graph. And Jonathan Levine commented on Twitter, this should worry people a lot more than COVID. Let's see, obesity among adults, 2015 or nearest year. So we see Japan leads the way with a 3.7. Actually, Korea next with 5.3, Italy with 9.8, and then Switzerland, Norway, Sweden, Netherlands, Austria, Denmark, France, Slovak Republic, Portugal, Poland, Spain, Greece, Israel, Estonia, Belgium, Iceland. That's kind of a surprise. Slovenia, the OECD in general, the Czech Republic, Latvia, Turkey, Luxembourg, Ireland, Germany, Finland, Chile. Canada comes in at 25.8. Which is about 7 times more than Japan. And then after Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Hungary, New Zealand, Mexico at 32.4, and the United States at 38.2. That's these figures as a percentage of the population 15 years and above have a body mass index such that they're classified as obese. Why is this important? Because apart from age, obesity is the quality which leads most often to people dying from COVID-19. And yet we don't talk about that, do we? John Levine comments, this remains one of the chief unexplored reasons the U.S. has had such bad outcomes with COVID, but we don't talk about it because of a misplaced obsession in media with shaming. Fit at any size. No, that is not true. That is a disastrous idea, but the elite has embraced it. The elite tends to be rather thin itself. Of course, the media has embraced it, and now we're subjected to pictures of Lizzo. Ooh, what a scorcher. No, she's hideous, absolutely hideous. There's a plague of plus size models. Ooh, fat. Not chubby, but fat is sexy. No, it is not. Now, if our latrine wallas really wanted to help out, instead of merely forcing people to do things and scaring us to death, they would be advocating that people lose weight. Just let's leave aside COVID-19. Thinness, a person's thinness is the most important quality related to longevity and health. Full stop. More than anything else. People who are obese, particularly morbidly obese, suffer wildly disproportionately from hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, etc., etc., etc. But who has been telling us that we need to become thinner? No. Similarly, it still remains something of a mystery to me. I know conspiracy theorists will have an answer right off the top. But typically, when a new disease shows up, the medical community has a think. What do we have? What drugs do we have that are already available, on the shelf, as it were, that could be used to treat this? But this time around with COVID-19, the medical authority said, no, not only are we not going to do that, we don't want you talking about it. If you do talk about it, we will punish you. We will toss you off social media. We will accuse you of all manner of things, up to including being a murderer. Very strange. Don't you think? No, have to wait for the vaccine. So Trump instituted his warp speed project, and the vaccines came out. Well, they were ready just before the election, but it was decided to keep quiet about that because it might help Donald Trump. So now we have the vaccines, and yeah, I got to be very careful about what I say, but declining efficacy. Okay, and if you look at the figures from Israel and England, well, even in the United States, which is behind the curve on this. So maybe it would have been a good idea, again, to look at what drugs we already had, drugs which are no longer under patent protection, often, usually very cheap. How about we experiment with those to see if we can help people who have the disease? No, not gonna do it. And maybe this is something which should be investigated after this terror is over, assuming that it is ever over. Yes, a viral meme from Breaking 911. Norman, Oklahoma Public Schools Board member Linda Sexton, quote, "It's just not okay for kids to commit murder by coming to school without a mask. And when it comes down to it, it's possible." Oh, so we've already terrorized children and isolated them. But now we're going to start suggesting to them that they're murderers. This is going to be just tremendous for their mental health. Wouldn't you say? Let's have a look at the chat. Hello to Anrun, G's Histal, Pelcasso 88, Dan, Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. Says it's really smoky where I am. But he says, Kevin, I'm still waiting for you to mention Heather Locklear with a tone of reverence. Heather Locklear, she was one of those blondes from the 80s, and they all tended to look the same, actually. Wasn't she with Charlie Sheen at one point? Tommy Lee. Yeah, that's always a good one. Richie Sambora. Yep, she knows how to pick them. Yes, bad things have happened to this woman. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, hello to Don Willis, Don from Beyond. Chogokin 666 says Trump is Emmanuel Goldstein. We know this, but was he willingly playing the role? Hello to No Sleep Till Breezewood, Pennsylvania. Buddy says, Kevin, if you end up reviewing Some Girls, remember, though it's not great, it has a young Jennifer Connelly, which is always a good thing. Hello, Oscar Toe. Hello to Head McNeck. Got my 15th Twitter ban today. Hit the ground running again with no problems. Let's see. Hello to Metal Mike, who says, yes, Lizzo is fat, P-H-A-T. And hello to Justin Proto, who says, when traveling outside the USA, I could always spot the Americans because they were the fattest people around. Actually, you know who the fattest people in Europe are? The Scots. I found this out a few years ago, and I was shocked, to put it mildly. But then I started, I saw a documentary on this, and deep fried Mars bars is something that they do in Scotland. Justin Proto, KMG, thoughts on paleo diet. I defer on these matters to Dennis Mangan, who is now goes by the moniker PD Mangan, who has written several books, which you can get from Amazon. He's very, very sensible on the subject. He came to the same conclusion that I did, although he's done obviously a lot more research on it, that around 1950, experts, public health experts, said everything you know about food is wrong, which obviously could not be true. But that's what they told us. And yes, fat is bad for you. No, it is not bad for you. Let's replace a fat and protein with high fructose corn syrup. And we see how that has turned out. Palcaso 88, KMG should read Naipaul's Journey to Nowhere or Burnham's Suicide of the West after Tainter. Those are good suggestions. Anran says, I used to confuse Heather Locklear with Heather Thomas, as did I. Hello to our Finnish friend Iako Raipala. The BMI formula is kind of unfair to tall people and underestimates obesity in short people. We should complain against discrimination against Nordic phenotypes. No Sleep Till Breezewood says, I'll eat a deep-fried Mars bar and then exercise for 3 hours to burn it. Oscar To says that he's never read Shiva Naipaul. He's outstanding. I like him better than his brother. It could have something, Kingsley Amos was once asked, people wanted to know about himself. And he said, well, if you want to know what kind of person I am, read my books. And that's generally true. And reading the books of both Shiva Naipaul and his much more famous brother, Vidya or V.S. Naipaul, I came to the conclusion that I like Shiva Naipaul's personality better. KMG, what's your favorite new band? I can't say that I have one, actually. I can't say that I have one. I suppose Roger Manning Jr. has a new outfit. Now, of course, he goes back a long way. He was in Jellyfish and Imperial Drag, and of course, he played with Beck for many, many years, and Air, and he's released his own remixes and solo albums. But he is in this band called the Licorice Quartet, which is kind of a partial Jellyfish reunion or a partial Imperial Drag reunion. It's got him on keyboards, Eric Dover on guitar and vocals, Tim Smith on bass, and the Ringer, their first record, Jeremy Stacey, who of course is playing with King Crimson now. They hired as the drummer. They've issued a set of 3 EPs, and I really quite like that kind of music. Okay, Star Rover says, Heather Locklear was hyper hot on Dynasty. That's not a show that I ever watched. I can't say that I watched much in the way of soap operas, either daytime or adult. Linda Evans was on that show, of course. Emma Sams, very, very attractive woman. Catherine Oxenberg, very, very attractive woman as well. But again, I will leave it at that. So what is happening where I am? This is from Sarah Turnbull at CTV News. Strong resurgence trajectory. Dr. Theresa Tam says Canada has entered 4th wave of COVID-19 pandemic. Tam said the national case count has taken a turn for the worse since the last modeling update 2 weeks ago. Yeah, cases. How about deaths? Why don't we talk about that? No, they don't want to talk about that. Yes, well, actually, she mentions that fortunately the number of deaths remained low, with an average of 7 deaths being reported daily. Yes, in a country of 38 million people. We need to build up momentum to increase coverage among young adults, the age group where most of the transmission is occurring. And how many deaths, though? This is from John Paul Tasker at CBC News. As Delta variant spreads, Canada's top doctors say mandatory vaccination for some workers is on the table, and it begins. Canada has emerged as a world leader in vaccine coverage, with 81% of the eligible population having had at least one dose. While that's a high number, it suggests there are still more than 5.7 million people over the age of 12 who have chosen to forego a shot altogether or to wait for a later date. In case you had no idea how many 5.7 million people was, the CBC explains it for us. The number of unvaccinated Canadians is roughly equivalent to everyone living in the Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton metropolitan areas combined. Experts agree vaccination coverage needs to be higher than it is now. Yes. And this is from Emerald Bensadoun and Saba Aziz at Global News. Provinces divided on making use of COVID-19 vaccine passports. Here's why. And Alberta, where I lived for 5 years, gave a short, sharp, and admirable answer. No, we're not going to have vaccine passports. British Columbia, BC health officials, more amenable to the idea. They said vaccine passports would be fully supported throughout the province, adding that they've been working with the federal government on the program. We're a big part of that. We're working with them. We support them in that, and they support us, said BC Health Minister Adrian Dix. We're working to ensure the details of it. Of course, the requirement to have information accessible and to have privacy considerations taken into account. That's pretty amusing. Privacy considerations. Have you had the jab? Are you double jabbed? Well, I don't think that's any of your business. Well, it is our business. So let's see the evidence, or you're not coming in here. Privacy, indeed. And it begins. This is from Courtney Dixon at CBC News. BC orders mandatory COVID-19 vaccination for workers in assisted living facilities and long-term care. In the United States, according to Jackie Sallow of the New York Post, the White House asserted Thursday that there will be no federal database for COVID-19 vaccinations, despite the rise of counterfeit vaccine cards as more businesses and educational institutions require proof of the shots. Jeff Zients, President Biden's COVID-19 response coordinator, said that the federal government, however, is working with the private sector on developing their own systems for verifying vaccinations. He said, quote, any system that is developed in the private sector or elsewhere must meet key standards, including affordability, being available both digitally and on paper, and importantly, here we go again, protecting people's privacy and security. I mean, do they know what they're saying, or do they just, lie openly? Deadly Lambda variant could be vaccine resistant, new study says. This is from Charlie Spearing at Breitbart. President Joe Biden at the White House Thursday referred to local officials enacting mask mandates in schools as heroes and condemned protesters who opposed their efforts. To the mayors, school superintendents, educators, local leaders who are standing up to the governor's politicizing mask protection for our kids, thank you. The president showed up 2 hours late for his scheduled speech on lowering the cost of prescription drugs, and while reading from a teleprompter, began excoriating Americans protesting mask mandates. I know there are a lot of people trying to turn a public safety measure, that is children wearing masks in school so that they can be safe, into a political dispute, Biden said disapprovingly. This isn't about politics. This is about keeping our children safe. Oh, it's not about politics when the government says, you must do this or else. That sounds pretty political to me. The president referred to a video of a Tennessee school meeting where parents chanted "no more masks" after deputies escorted an anti-mask doctor out of a school meeting. Yes. Later, the protesters shouted, "We will not comply," and confronted public health officials as they left the meeting. Biden defended the officials for just trying to keep children safe from the coronavirus, noting that healthcare workers are also caring for people who refused to get vaccinated. Thank God we have heroes like you, and I stand with you all, and America should as well. You know, we've heard this argument with regard to smokers for decades now. You know, we're not going to hire you if you smoke, or their insurance premiums should be this much higher, and you are costing us a fortune. You should pay. Well, if it's true, as Richard Dahl argued or estimated, that the average smoker dies 5 years before the average non-smoker, even leaving aside the enormous amount of tax revenues that smokers provide, by dying 5 years earlier, they save governments a fortune, an enormous amount of money in both healthcare costs and pension costs. But isn't it funny that this discussion of you people have been irresponsible in your personal behavior, maybe you should be denied treatment, but we're going to make you pay. Why is that never brought up with regard to AIDS? Because the medical costs associated with people with HIV are stupendous. And the medical costs just overall involved in treating male homosexuals are similarly stupendous. But these are sacred people. So, you know, they're not like those redneck Christian evangelicals who refuse to get vaccinated. No, wait a minute. It turns out that it's people with PhDs who are the most hesitant about vaccination. And this is again from Breitbart, from Wendell Husbo. Internal documents suggest that Pfizer, the drug manufacturer responsible for one of the world's leading coronavirus vaccines, does not require coronavirus vaccination of its employees. Images of a purported confidential Pfizer booklet written by Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer Payal Becher indicate the company has defied President Biden's push to have private companies mandate vaccination and only requires testing of its unvaccinated employees. And again, from the same source, this time from Kyle Morris, Texas Governor Greg Abbott said Wednesday that local authorities who attempt to undermine his executive order prohibiting government entities from mandating face coverings will be taken to court. In Los Angeles, this is from Tom Tapp at Deadline. Los Angeles City Council voted 13-0 yesterday to have the city attorney prepare an ordinance requiring people to show proof of at least partial vaccination against COVID to enter most public indoor spaces in the city, including restaurants, bars, gyms, concert venues, movie theaters, and even retail establishments. What kind of retail establishments? Grocery stores? They haven't got to the point yet where they're seeking to starve people out, but I suppose that will come. This is from Steve Watson at Summit News. A Fox News poll contends that a majority of Americans are in support of vaccine mandates and the introduction of COVID passports that tie freedoms to vaccination status. The survey found that 50% of respondents are in favor of requiring proof of a coronavirus vaccine for indoor activities, such as restaurants, gyms, and performances, while 46% opposed the idea. 50% also agreed that, quote, protecting the safety of Americans, unquote, by requiring vaccination in order to engage in everyday activities trumps protecting the freedom of Americans to choose whether or not they were vaccinated. In contrast, 47% of respondents said protecting freedom is more important. Well, that's pretty much a half and half divide, and an attempt by governments to force this with close to half the population objecting, that's only going to lead to serious trouble. I will add, of course, this is manufactured consent. If the elite, Facebook, Twitter, the government of the United States, or whatever, get together in order to force people off social media, to silence people who do not agree with the dominant narrative on COVID-19, well, then people are just going to hear that, well, yeah, you got to do what the government says because they have the science on their side. As I say, manufactured consent. Polling is, generally speaking, manufactured consent. And this story is, the next story is from Reason. And I'm not fond of that magazine, but this fellow, J.D. Tusil, is pretty decent. A black market in COVID-19 vaccination cards was inevitable. Given my warnings about the dawning age of vaccine passports, it shouldn't have surprised me when my phone rang over the weekend and an old college buddy asked if I could hook him up with a forged COVID-19 vaccination record card. For the record, I can't help him with that, but plenty of other people can. Proliferating requirements for proof of vaccination by schools, employers, and governments have inevitably spawned a thriving industry in bogus documents for use by those who do not want to get jabbed or who resent being bossed around. Back in February, when vaccines were young and we were all pretending to be innocent, the FBI warned that posting photos online of vaccine cards could invite ID theft, and more convincingly, that people were using the vaccination cards placed onto social media to forge vaccination cards and selling them for profit. Later, the FBI called out active markets in forged cards and arrested vendors of the documents. The unauthorized use of an official government agency seal on such cards is a crime that may be punishable under Title 18, United States Code, Section 1017, and other federal laws, the feds warned. Penalties may include hefty fines and prison time. Note that black market vendors of bogus vaccine cards began appearing prior to New York City requiring proof of COVID-19 vaccination for entry to the city's bars, restaurants, gyms, and concert venues. Demand for their wares can only grow now that other jurisdictions are floating similar requirements. Even before local governments seriously considered requiring shots, employers and colleges began the trend. The federal government, Microsoft, Tyson Foods, and Walmart are among the largest employers mandating vaccination for some or all on-site workers. Tyson suffered COVID-19 closures at plants as early as the spring of 2020 and fears further disruption from outbreaks among its workforce. But a lot of people are hesitant about the vaccine or else just don't like being told what to do. The CEO of Snap-on told the Wall Street Journal that his company rejected mandates for fear of angering workers. Instead, the tool company offers incentives for getting vaccinated, including time off. Other companies pay bonuses for vaccination rather than tick off people on whom they rely. Walmart offers $150 for getting a shot, while steelmaker Cleveland Cliffs sweetens the pot with 4 figures. That's creative thinking, because ticked off people resistant to vaccines or just resentful of mandates fuel the black market. A recent Associated Press investigation found bogus vaccination certificates for sale across social media and on dark websites for as little as $25. The flimsy CDC-issued COVID-19 vaccination record cards aren't exactly high-tech documents designed with security in mind. They require nothing more than a scanner printer, some card stock, and a few minutes to duplicate for those who care to do the jobs themselves. That's why governments and business are turning to digital vaccine passports that are supposed to be both durable and resistant to fraud, but early efforts haven't been entirely successful. I forged it in 11 minutes, Albert Fox Kahn, executive director of the Surveillance Technology Oversight Board, warned in April about New York's much ballyhooed Excelsior Pass. Not only do the security promises of the Excelsior Pass fail to hold up to scrutiny, but the tracking tech raises an alarming array of public health, equity, and civil rights questions that remain unanswered. Tusil concludes, a black market in proof of vaccination was inevitable as soon as arm twisting became the preferred tactic for convincing people to get their shots. Instead of backing people into a corner, we should convince them, even bribe them, and be happy that we get as many to agree to protect themselves against COVID-19 as we do. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who apparently was at one time governor of California. Crazy, right? This is from Paul Boyes at Breitbart. Schwarzenegger said, "You're a schmuck if you don't wear a mask," just days after photos and video showed prominent Democrats from Barack Obama to Representative Rashida Tlaib and DC Mayor Muriel Bowser partying indoors, maskless. You cannot go and not put the mask on because when you breathe, you can infect someone else, and you can infect someone else that gets sick and may die. The Terminator star and former governor of California said during a discussion with CNN's Biana Golodraga and Alexander Vindman. Were any of these people born in the United States? So this is why I think we all have to work together on this. The only way we can kick this virus is, again, if we do like I suggested earlier about politics, you have to come together rather than fighting and always just saying this according to my principles. This is a free country and I'm going to have the freedom to wear no mask. You have the freedom to wear no mask, but you know something? You're a schmuck for not wearing a mask before adding, I don't want to villainize anyone. Screw your freedom, Schwarzenegger said. You cannot say, no one is going to tell me that I'm going to stop here, that I have to stop at this traffic light. I'm going to go right through it. Then you kill someone else, then it is your doing. I think this makes it pretty clear why Arnold Schwarzenegger moved to America. One reason only, money. A sad piece from Amy Cuddy and Jill Ellen Riley at the Washington Post. Why this stage of the pandemic makes us all so anxious. Well, I suspect that one of the reasons that so many people are so very anxious is because they go on social media or they go to journals like the Washington Post to hear people, almost always women, talking about how frightened, fed up, exhausted, anxious, terrified, etc., that they are. With the threat from the Delta variant bearing down across the United States, it's almost hard to remember the heady days earlier this summer when many of us were experiencing relief, joy, even euphoria as we began to resurface from the pandemic. Barbecues with friends, dinners out, live music, connecting with people face to face. All of the antidotes to isolation we'd been craving became tangible realities. During the week of June 14th, as vaccinations were becoming widespread and public life seemed to be returning to normal, Gallup classified 59.2% of Americans as thriving based on their responses to a survey that asked them to evaluate their lives, the highest average score on that measure in 13 years. Optimism was through the roof. We can't have that, though. But now many people are experiencing a starkly different set of feelings, blunted emotions, spikes in anxiety and depression, and a desire to drastically change something about their lives. How about losing weight? If this sounds familiar, you might be one of the many people experiencing what we've begun to refer to as pandemic flux syndrome. It's admittedly not a clinical term, well, not yet, but it seems to capture something about the moment we're living through. Since June and that optimistic poll result, the U.S. has taken significant steps backward in fighting the virus on vaccination, masks, etc., etc., etc. By midsummer, we began hearing from friends, family, and colleagues who were experiencing some combination of acute anxiety, sadness, and detachment. Sarah, a 44-year-old production analyst and self-described extrovert from Detroit, told us, I was so eager to go out and socialize, but now I'm surprised at how often I want to retreat back to home when I'm actually out with friends. I wonder whether this woman has any children. I rather suspect that she doesn't. Kevin, a 51-year-old partner at a mid-sized law firm in Connecticut, explained, I was looking forward and holding out hope that things would feel like they'd return to normal this spring and summer as face-to-face meetings with clients and colleagues picked up. But now that I'm having a lot more in-person meetings with all these steps forward and then away from the end of the pandemic, rather than alleviating my angst, I feel like it's exacerbating my anxiety and depression. Yes, the whole world wants to know about your anxiety and depression. The prolonged liminal state is clearly taking a collective mental health toll, and several distinct psychological processes may be contributing to our unease. It exacts a price, for example, when we are denied a clearly delineated fresh start moment, explains Katie Milkman, a Wharton Business School professor and author of the new book, How to Change. Milkman adds, clearly demarcated fresh starts give us renewed motivation and help us pursue important goals. But for most of us, that clear, fresh start hasn't materialized. The Delta variant arrived at just the right time to break our spirits. Second, for many people, our brains and bodies are simply fatigued, and recalibrating to the new circumstances is too much to bear. In part, that's because many of us have been relying on what psychologists call surge capacity. As psychologist Anne Maston explained in an interview with science journalist Tara Hale, surge capacity is a collection of adaptive systems, mental and physical, that humans draw on for short-term survival in acutely stressful situations, but such a response can keep us going for only so long. Eventually, we deplete our surge capacity and need a break so that it can recharge. It looked like many of us were about to get that break, then the moment vanished. Perhaps all of these people would be better off if they learned to understand something which is undeniably true, that we are all going to die, and the moment of our death is unknown to us. That is to say, average longevity has reached 80 or so, but the fact is there are many, many people who don't make it to 80 for all sorts of reasons. Reasons often as banal as being in a car accident or even slipping in the shower and smacking your head. Muriel Spark, the great writer, once said that life lived without an awareness of death is insipid, which I think is advice that should be taken to heart. Oh, yes. And in the damnable stupidity file, this is from Anna Garatelli, the Washington Examiner. The city of Laredo, Texas, has refused to take in migrants who have been bussed in from elsewhere on the border after discovering 40% of them tested positive for the coronavirus, according to two local government officials. That was very high, Laredo Mayor Pete Sands said in an interview, referring to the infection rate among migrants dropped off by the Border Patrol last week. The 40% infection rate is the highest known positivity rate across the U.S.-Mexico border. Last week, McAllen, Texas, reported a 15% positivity rate among migrants from custody. So while Joe Biden is browbeating people to get the vaccine, and you got to put the masks on the children or else, the United States government, of which he is the president, is literally importing infected people from Mexico and Central America. It rather makes one doubt their competency, does it not? This next story is a combination of both COVID stupidity and general stupidity regarding the criminal justice system. This is from Lee Brown at the New York Post. A New Jersey inmate who was freed early because of the COVID-19 pandemic has been charged with murdering a teenager just 2 days after his release. Jerry Crawford, 25, was serving time for burglary when he was let out on public health emergency credits to parole supervision November 4th. He has since been charged with the murder of Davion Scarborough, 18, who was gunned down in Bridgeton on November 6th, just 2 days after Crawford got out of Southwoods State Prison. He was charged alongside Yusuf Waits, who had also just got out of custody less than a month before the shooting. Waits, 23, was released from Garden State Youth Correctional Facility in Crosswicks October 10th after completing his sentence on a gun charge. The pair were allegedly caught on surveillance video with Scarborough shortly before his body was found riddled with multiple bullets less than half a mile from the prison from which Crawford had been released. When Crawford was charged last month, he was already back in custody on gun and theft charges. However, those charges have since been dismissed. Both men were indicted on charges of first-degree murder and first-degree conspiracy to commit murder for Scarborough's fatal shooting. Waits was also indicted for attempting to kill 2 other men in a sweeping indictment involving 8 other defendants, another killing, a drive-by shooting, and a daylight gun battle. When it was announced that prisons would begin releasing prisoners because of COVID, I thought, they're already in quarantine. So wouldn't that be pretty much the safest place for them to be? But the experts thought better. And from the hysteria file, again from Paul Boyce at Breitbart, New Zealand is closing its borders for the remainder of the year, continuing the country's embrace of a total isolationist strategy in its fight against the coronavirus. On Thursday, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the country's borders will never be the same after the pandemic, likening the situation to the 9/11 attacks. According to Ardern, vaccinated travelers from low-risk countries would be allowed to enter the country in early 2022. Since the start of the pandemic, New Zealand adopted a strict border protection policy, which resulted in only 26 coronavirus-related deaths. Yeah, okay. Well, how is it doing in 2021? A coronavirus case has not been reported in the New Zealand community since February 28th this year, while 2 imported cases have been recorded caught in managed isolation or quarantine. And as a result, New Zealand has pretty much riddled its economy with bullets. But got to get it down to zero. Got to get it down to zero. Let's go to Lockdown Skeptics, or Daily Skeptic, as it is called now. Belarus, the country with no restrictions and no disaster. Belarus has finally, after several months of delay, published its overall mortality figures up to March 2021, meaning for the first time we have a plausibly reliable indicator of the true impact of the pandemic in the country famous for refusing to impose even minimal measures. Few have trusted the official COVID case and death statistics from the authoritarian country, which are implausibly low. However, the overall death statistics are generally thought to be reliable, and indeed, by comparing them to neighboring countries, we can see that they are comparable, adding to the sense that they are accurate. While the country did not impose any COVID restrictions or guidance at all, there was some voluntary behavior change, as mobility data shows, but it was limited compared with other places. And we have more. Australia's capital entering 7-day lockdown following 1 positive COVID test. Canberra, the capital of Australia, is being plunged into lockdown for a whole week following the reporting of a single positive COVID test. Retail and hospitality venues will be closed again, and residents will not be able to leave their homes for non-essential reasons past 5 p.m. Canberra joins Sydney, Melbourne, and several cities in New South Wales that are locked down due to the Delta variant. Canberra residents can leave home only for essential reasons from 5 p.m. On Thursday. General retail stores will be closed, and hospitality venues will be able to sell only takeout. Schools will be open to students who cannot stay at home. The infection is the first locally acquired case in the city of 460,000 since July the 10th of last year. Fully vaccinated Brits won't have to self-isolate after coming into contact with a COVID case from Monday. UK vaccine passport allows for self-declared exemption. Are vaccine passports dead? That may be premature, but they have certainly seemed on life support this week, with even Gates-funded Telegraph global health correspondent Paul Newkey writing them off as useless in a recent piece. Newkey quotes University College London's Professor Francois Balloux, who argues the vaccine's protection against transmission is so poor that they can no longer be deemed to protect others. It is not so much a duty to others to get vaccinated, but a protection for oneself. There won't be any herd immunity wall to hide behind. Newkey suggests that mass testing will be used instead, noting that already UK festivals and other mass events are switching their entry requirements to require a negative test of everyone, even where visitors have been double vaccinated. And more than 4 in 5 UK city workers have not returned to the office. And there's this picture, which they've used before, with a woman, a mother, on a sitting at a table, and she has her laptop and she's typing away, and she has a child who appears to be about, about 18 months old, and there's a bunch of children's toys and a bunch of food, and the child has got hold of mom's glasses and is screwing around with them. I don't think much work is getting done in this situation. And if this is true, this suggests that perhaps 4 in 5 UK city workers should be sacked as surplus to requirements. Is it better to get a given amount of COVID over with more quickly? The Delta variant has caused infections to surge in multiple countries and is even driving up hospitalizations in some US states, notably Florida, although that state has a vaccination rate only 10 percentage points lower than the UK. Vaccinations are not as concentrated among the elderly as they are here. Well, what should we make of the surge of infections and indeed hospitalizations? In a recent blog post, economist Tyler Cowen argues that things aren't quite as simple as many people, or at least as many lockdown proponents, are assuming. Even the growth of hospitalizations, much less the growth in cases, is a misleading signal for how well we are doing. Why is that? As Cowen argues, it is better to get a given amount of COVID over with more quickly rather than less quickly, subject to the constraint that you do not overwhelm your hospital system. Interestingly, Cowen's argument is not dissimilar to the Great Barrington Declaration. I say interestingly, Noel Carr writes, because Cowen previously criticized the declaration, claiming that it strikes exactly the wrong tone and stresses exactly the wrong points. However, he would presumably say that the situation is different now. We have vaccines, and letting the virus spread among people who are voluntarily unvaccinated is not the same as letting it spread among people who haven't yet been offered a vaccine. And let's go to Alex Berenson's site and see whether he is still allowed to be on Twitter. Yay! Oh, correction, August 12th. An earlier version of this story overstated the number of children who have been hospitalized in Texas recently with COVID-19. The story said over 5,800 children had been hospitalized during a 7-day period in August, according to the CDC. That number correctly referred to children hospitalized with COVID-19 since the pandemic began. In actuality, 783 children were admitted to Texas hospitals with COVID-19 between July the 1st and August 9th of this year. Stephen T. Dennis comments, that's one heck of a correction. Remember when we said that all those kids died of the row? Berenson comments, we hoped all those kids died of the row because it would have been an awesome story and scared you and your wife. And your wife is a teachers union lobbyist. And anyway, whatevs, look, a unicorn. You can trust us. And one of the things that Berenson has taken to doing is he leads you up to a point and then he stops writing because he will get kicked off Twitter permanently. This is where we are. This is where we have arrived. That science is supposed to involve free inquiry, but free inquiry, asking questions, no longer committed, no longer permitted, because it is akin to murder. Circular Logic, or at Left Breaks, said, my vision of hell is a Jennifer Rubin talking to me for all eternity. And Berenson comments, welcome to Twitter. And let's go back to the chat. Mom's working from home. A lot of those jobs are probably BS anyway, says Steve. Yes. Urban Planner says, I've noticed that all these Taliban fighters aren't wearing the mask. I doubt any are vaccinated. Burkin Sultanov says, Talibans are mainly Pashto, the Bachabazi folks. Well, my understanding that the Taliban is fiercely opposed to Bachabazi, the T-boys, which is a venerable old Afghan tradition of elderly men raping boys. And the U.S. military decided that this was a venerable tradition that needed to be protected. Yes, actually, that actually happened. They disciplined an officer who told them to knock it off or know the reason why. I will be talking about Afghanistan shortly. COVID is the least deadly thing in Australia, says Steve. Steve, New Zealand economy, tourism, and raising sheep. Yes, and you cut out the tourism, obviously that's going to be very bad. Very bad indeed. Who else do we have here? Okay. How can Trump run the media? How can Trump run if the media gives him zero coverage and he gets censored on social media as well, asks Metal Mike. The GOP won't let him debate. Well, if you were listening when I was talking about that school board meeting in Tennessee, you will see that direct action seems to be on the table now. Oscar Toe says, at this point, the Lord of the Flies island scenario is much more preferable for childhood education. Star Rover says, like to remember Arnold as the man who inspired high school kids in Astoria and Seaside, Oregon to pursue their dreams when he was filming Kindergarten Cop, not the simp of today. Don Willis says, Joe Biden being president makes me wish for Shirley Chisholm as president. Shirley Chisholm, eh? Wow, you're taking me back. Okay. Steve says that the vaccinator is out there. It doesn't eat. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop until you are jabbed. Let's see. Comment on the Terminator. Yakaro says Terminator was my favorite movie when I was a kid. I must have seen 1 and 2 100 times total. Now Arnold has ruined them for me. Yeah, I don't know. I used to feel that way, and for a while, I'd look up, say, actresses that I thought were, good at acting or mainly just attractive, say, and then it just seemed inevitably this actress has appeared in a reading of the Vagina Monologues, and I thought, you too? You're one of the pod people, but then I realized they're all pod people in Hollywood. They're all pod people. There's no getting away from it. It is very much not in their interest to be independent in any respect. Okay, here's a story from my old home of Vancouver, where I spent most of my life. And it is truly dispiriting because apparently we are running out of the intelligence that is necessary to sustain civilization. This is by David P. Ball at CBC News. After string of coyote attacks, BC officials urge people to stay out of Vancouver's Stanley Park. If you know Vancouver, or if you've even read about it, you know that Stanley Park is one of the glories of Vancouver, is one of the glories of Canada, is one of the most famous parks in the world. Stay out. There has been another attack by a coyote in Vancouver's iconic Stanley Park, despite several of the animals being euthanized after dozens of previous incidents. Scientists have struggled to find an explanation for the highly unusual behavior, though experts say they are likely finding human food or even being fed. That being Vancouver, that latter part would not surprise me. The latest incident, which happened around 9:30 p.m. Tuesday, is the second recent coyote attack on a young child. According to BC's Conservation Officer Service, a 2-year-old boy was bitten on July the 12th, also at night. The boy was running ahead when a coyote lunged and bit him on the leg, the agency said. His parents chased the coyote away. The child received minor injuries and was later released from hospital. The Conservation Officer Service declined an interview request Wednesday. It's, of course, really unfortunate, said Nadia Zenicki, Urban Wildlife Programs Coordinator with the Stanley Park Ecology Society. To reiterate how strange this is, prior to this year, from 2001 to 2020, there were 8 coyote attacks in the Lower Mainland. From December to now, we're nearing 40. Zenicky said the group has created signage bearing the word warning in large letters and a coyote's image to get the message across clearly and urgently to visitors and locals alike. But getting the city's approval for those signs took time. We absolutely need signs, Zenicky said. I actually created the signage, but it took a while to get approval with more graphic images for people who may not have English as their first language. So people who are from out of town can understand this is something they should be concerned about. Yeah. Reminds me, I worked at UBC for 12 years, and I was visiting it, the campus, a couple of years ago, and I went into the washroom at the Student Union building, which is now closed permanently, and I saw these pictographs all over the wall, and they were explaining how to wash your hands. Oh, so the University of British Columbia is chock full of students who don't know how to wash their hands. What on earth are these people doing at university? What on earth are they doing in my country? Zenicky said that without major changes in how people behave in the park, the estimated population of at least 12 coyotes there will likely continue to thrive thanks to human garbage and some who choose to ignore signs and feed the wild animals anyway. In mid-July, officers killed 4 of the animals in a bid to stop the attacks. The Conservation Service again urged people to stay out of Stanley Park because of the high risk of encountering an aggressive coyote. Okay. Some people, idiots, will say, well, that's just nature, and coyotes have just as much right to be there as we do. Parks are not nature. Parks are entirely artificial, and they are a rather recent development in human history. In any event, people cannot live together with wild animals. The coyotes should be hunted down and killed, every single one of them. But that would be mean or something. Perhaps Stanley Park should just be closed to the public forever. And, because it costs money to maintain and such like. And people feel bad when they read about a 2-year-old being attacked by a coyote. Similarly, not far from where I live in Saanich, which is a suburb of Victoria. Victoria in physical size is actually quite small. At a school where one of my children used to go, there was a mountain lion in the parking lot. And sightings of mountain lions in Saanich, in built-up areas of Saanich, have become common. There's an easy solution: kill them. Because we can't live with ferocious animals like that. But no, our cities are being overrun by foxes and raccoons and other vermin. And it's now common in London, say, for people to be attacked by foxes. And of course, fox bites, raccoon bites. There's a risk of rabies there, which, if not treated, is a 100% fatal disease. But no, we don't want to be mean. Again, this is really collapse of civilization stuff. And, okay. There is a saying in the news business, which I'm sure you've all heard: if it bleeds, it leads. They call it news. Every so often you hear people say things like, well, why don't they cover all the planes that didn't crash yesterday? Okay. But now we're moving towards a model of if it bleeds, it's redacted. This is from pointer.org. Gannett launches a network-wide push to rework its crime coverage. Fewer mugshots, additional context, and moving beyond police narratives are just some of the changes its newsrooms are making. Moving beyond police narratives, because when a certain type of crime is committed by a certain type of person, there's always an interview with that person's mother who says he didn't do nothing, he a good boy. And then we find out that he had turned his life around and was about to release a mixtape, or sorry, drop a mixtape, moving beyond police narratives. This is by Angela Fu. As the Atlantic regional editor for Gannett, Hollis Towns is responsible for setting the strategy and tone of the papers within his region. 2 years ago, as he was looking at story budgets across his papers, he noticed something concerning. I saw more and more reactive crime stories that didn't connect the dots, said Towns. I saw more people, black and brown folks who look like me, splattered across all of our front pages and on our websites, and no context offered for what happened. No follow-up offered after the story had initially run. Well, how about Gannett continues to report crimes, and then they say slavery, blah, 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 redlining, blah, 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 Jim Crow, blah, 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 systemic racism. Okay, is that enough context for you? People like to know what is happening in their city. They like to know what is happening in their neighborhoods. And they like to know which neighborhoods to avoid. Editors at the papers in the Atlantic region also knew they had a problem. In New York, Democrat and Chronicle executive editor Michael Killian realized there was a disconnect between the paper's coverage of Rochester and what he was personally seeing. An analysis of 1 month of coverage in 2019 revealed that 20% of the paper's stories were crime-related, but criminal activity didn't make up 20% of everyday life in Rochester. Well, you know, Steve Saylor joked about this. Well, perhaps their papers should be 30% about sleeping. No, I suppose we're moving towards a French model where these crimes are simply not reported at all. In Germany, oh, we're not going to release the names of the people arrested. Oh, why would that be? Something to do with privacy? No, when you're arrested for a crime, you forfeited your privacy. It's because they don't want people to form patterns, to recognize patterns. This story appeared, 2 days ago in The Guardian. Kate Clanchey is rewriting her critically acclaimed memoir after widespread criticism of her portrayal of her pupils, particularly children of color or autistic children. It follows reports that the publisher Picador had been in discussions to update future editions of the Orwell Prize-winning book, Some Kids I Taught and What They Taught Me, after days of online scrutiny over offensive passages, and was criticized for not going far enough in its initial statement. Readers and fellow authors had been critical on Goodreads and Twitter of descriptions in the memoir, including the use of racial tropes such as chocolate-colored skin and almond-shaped eyes, and references to one student as African Jonathan, and another being so small and square and Afghan with his big nose and premature mustache. Another passage was highlighted for the inclusion of ableist descriptions, in which Clanchey, a poet and teacher, refers to two autistic children as unselfconsciously odd and jarring company, and writes, probably more than 1 hour a week in their company would irritate me too, but for that hour, I like them very much. The award-winning teenage author Dana McAnulty, who is autistic, shared the passages and tweeted, "Some people didn't believe me when I shared some of my education experiences and how teachers felt about me. We can understand how you really feel about us." Well, how you really feel. Okay, well, a lot of people in that category have a habit of wailing. Just start wailing at very loud volume, and seemingly they won't stop. They simply won't stop. So what do you think is likely to be the common reaction to that type of behavior? Okay, so the story gets better. Of course, the stories always get better. This is from Libby Emmons at Post Millennial. The Orwell Foundation has essentially walked back an award they gave to Kate Clanchey's memoir in September 2020. The foundation initially had high praise for the book, sending it to prominent leaders in education in the UK. But after complaints from readers that her descriptions of students were offensive, Clanchey is rewriting the book, and the foundation has acknowledged the concerns and hurt expressed about the book. And let's go to it. The Orwell Foundation, they give out this prize called the Orwell Prize, and it's supposed to honor, free thinkers, people who say things which might not necessarily be mainstream opinion, but that's over, obviously. The Orwell Foundation has released the following statement on our website, which is copied in full in the thread below. Acknowledges concerns and hurt, understands the importance of language, and encourages open and careful debate about all the work which comes through our prizes. Everyone should be able to engage in these discussions on any platform without fear of abuse. The Orwell Prizes are awarded by a panel of independent judges appointed each year by the foundation, who make their own decisions as to the awards in each category. The foundation does not comment on individual judging panel decisions. And Keith fact-checked, or at Acid Keith commented that distant sound is Mr. Orwell laughing at you from 6 feet under. Yeah, can't get autistic people angry at you. Fox Day was nuked by Google from Blogger. He writes, as you've almost certainly noticed if you're here, Google has decided to roll the dice and take its chances with the legal Legion of Evil. As with YouTube, Blogger has an entirely deplatformed account, but instead elected to block access to the blog while publicly issuing false and defamatory statements about it. This is not a surprise. This day has been a long time in coming, and we've been prepared for it on every front. You may wish to note that this post was made barely an hour after Google took action. He argues that it's time to abandon free hosting. And you can find him at voxday.net from now on. And this is from Megan Basham at the Daily Wire. The American Booksellers Association released an update last week detailing new oversight to prevent accidentally promoting conservative authors. As the Daily Wire previously reported, the ABA, a 121-year-old trade association that ostensibly advocates for free expression in independent bookstores, sends out book lists and review copies of select new titles for retailers to consider stocking. In July, the organization mistook a social justice-themed teen romance titled Blackout for Candace Owens' best-selling book, Blackout: How Black America Can Make Its Second Escape from the Democrat Plantation, sending out a cover image of Owens' book to approximately 750 stores. The group also included publicity copies of Abigail Schreier's Irreversible Damage, a work critical of the gender transition trend among teen girls. When left-wing shop owners and activists erupted in outrage, ABA CEO Allison Hill immediately apologized for the horrific harm, that's in quotes, horrific harm the mailing caused, calling it a serious, violent incident. She also described Owens' book as racist. Okay, yeah. Violent. These people don't know what violence is. They don't have a clue. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Washington Post journalist Jennifer Rubin celebrated the fact that the white population in America has fallen for the first time since 1790 as, quote, fabulous news, unquote. Fabulous news. According to Rubin, this is marvelous. A more diverse, more inclusive society. This is fabulous news. Now we need to prevent minority white rule. As Chris Menahan notes, Rubin had previously enthusiastically shared a tweet by fellow Washington Post columnist Max Boot, crazy name, crazy guy, which asserted that the Trump era will be seen as a sad last gasp of white resistance, and that hard-working Latin American illegal immigrants should replace contemptible Republican cowards in order to enhance Americans' greatness. A few decades from now, when the entire country is majority-minority, the Trump era will be seen as a sad last gasp of white resistance, a reprehensible episode that will be recounted alongside the McCarthy era, the internment of citizens and non-citizens of Japanese descent during World War II, and the Palmer raids. Yes, exclaimed Rubin. The media routinely claims that expressing concern over the demographic decline of white people is a dangerous conspiracy theory, although it's apparently not dangerous nor a conspiracy, and it is in fact a great thing when the likes of Rubin and Boot are celebrating it. Democrats routinely hail the decline of the white demographic and are its biggest cheerleaders because it's far easier to brainwash dependent non-whites into voting for them. Back in 2015, Joe Biden also welcomed the demographic thinning of white people. Quote, by 2017, those of us of European stock will be an absolute minority in the United States of America, he said. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I'm going to point out that both Jennifer Rubin and Max Boot are not only white themselves, they are Jewish. Perhaps they are taking the view that Jews are not whites. If they think this is going to save them from the revolution, they are clearly mistaken. Rank ingratitude is one of the things I could say. America's not only sheltered Jews. In America, Jews have flourished as they have never flourished anywhere in the world before. But for some reason, both Jennifer Rubin and Max Boot hate white people and wish them harm. This is not good for the Jews. It is terrible. But when are these people going to smarten up? Never. It's never going to happen. And I don't suppose that either Jennifer Rubin or Max Boot understand, and there are studies on this, that the people who are flocking to America, a lot of them really don't like Jews. Mexicans, one example. But they don't care. Remind me how Jennifer Rubin got to be somebody on the supposed right wing. She's not a conservative. She's not right wing. She is a Hollywood lawyer with all that entails. But after 9/11, America went kind of crazy. And I don't even remember what it was that Jennifer Rubin said about 9/11 that was supposed to be memorable or interesting or intelligent. Of course, there was this worship of George W. Bush. And George W. Bush infamously said that the Quran is as influential and important in American culture as the 10 Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah. Let us go. Before we do that, this is from Josh Boswell at the Daily Mail. Exclusive, the Russians have videos of me doing crazy effing sex. Hunter Biden is seen in unearthed footage telling prostitute that Russian drug dealers stole another of his laptops. He claims Russian drug dealers stole another of his laptops for blackmail while he was drugged out in a Vegas hotel room in 2018. Video obtained by the Mail shows Hunter with a naked hooker in 2019 after filming a sex tape and explaining how he believed his laptop was stolen. Hunter left the camera rolling as he recounted a Las Vegas bender in which he spent 18 days going around from penthouse suite to penthouse suite. The incident would mean Hunter lost a total of 3 computers, each likely to hold sensitive information on President Joe Biden. The laptops contain embarrassing pictures. I don't know if the Daily Mail is going to explain just how very embarrassing and possibly criminal some of these pictures and videos might be. Yes, the New York Post reported this story, and then it was suppressed by the rest of the media because obviously Hunter Biden, and through Hunter Biden, his father, Joe Biden, have been compromised. They are security threats to the United States, but it would not be useful for Americans to learn this information, because then they might be less likely to vote for Joe Biden instead of Donald Trump. Democracy dies in darkness, as they say. So let's go back to Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies, which was published by Cambridge University Press in 1988. And I think that the relevance of this book to current situation, I don't think that it needs to be explained. So let's just get to it here. Hang on, let me close that. And I'm reading this off a PDF, which is, well, it makes it a bit harder to get to, but I will be there shortly. We're going to talk about China first. And this book is a recounting, to begin with, of many complex civilizations which have collapsed. And then later we will get to the question of what these civilizations held in common and what we can learn from this. Okay. The Western Chao Empire. The Chao dynasty succeeded the corrupt Shang in the mastery of China by 1122 BC. A reign was subsequently established that later Chinese looked back on as a golden age. The Chao ruled through a feudal system, but within a few centuries their control began to slip. The royal house began to lose power as early as 934 BC. Barbarian invasions increased in frequency through the 9th and 8th centuries, and regional lords began to ignore their obligations to the Chao court. In 771 BC, the last Western Chao ruler was killed in battle, and the capital city, Hao, overrun and sacked by northerners. Following this disaster, the Chao capital was moved east to Luoyang, where the Eastern Chao dynasty resided from 770 to 256 BC. The Eastern Chao, however, were powerless figureheads. Chinese unity effectively collapsed with the Western Chao. Through the spring and autumn and warring states, that is from 770 to 222 BC periods, disintegration and endless conflict were the norms. Powerful regional states emerged which contended endlessly for hegemony, forging and breaking alliances, engaging in wars, and manipulating barbarian groups. Through time, as conflict intensified, smaller states were continuously absorbed. The contending states became fewer but larger, until finally the Qin reunified China in 221 BC. The period of disintegration and conflict produced some of China's major philosophical, literary, and scientific achievements. Confucius wrote during and in reaction to this era. Contending schools of philosophy, the 100 schools, proliferated and flourished between 500 and 250 BC. In addition to many technical and economic developments, Chinese political thought in its classical form emerged during the worst of the breakdown. The Harappan Civilization. The Harappan or Indus Valley Civilization existed in northwestern India, perhaps as early as 2400 BC. It was apparently dominated by two major cities, Mohenjo-Daro in the central Indus Valley and Harappa upstream. Both were established according to similar designs, a fortified citadel on the western side with civic and religious buildings, and a lower urban zone with gridded standardized streets and systems of drainage and refuse disposal. There were many smaller centers, some with the same basic layout. Seaports controlled the coastline above and below the Indus. This literate civilization shows a striking degree of uniformity through time and space in pottery, ornaments, bricks, weapons, implements of bronze and stone, seals, and civic planning. Both major sites had massive granaries. The impression is of a highly centralized society in which the state controlled many facets of daily living: milling grain, manufacturing bricks and mass-producing pottery, obtaining firewood, and building residences. Yet by roughly 1750 BC, this regional uniformity and centralized control had broken down. In urban centers, the standardization of street frontages declined. Brickwork was less careful. Bricks from older buildings were reused in new expedient ones, and older buildings were subdivided. Pottery kilns came for the first time to be built within city walls. Expressive art became simpler. Hoards of jewelry were stashed away. Groups of unburied corpses were left lying in the streets. At some centers, the Harappan occupation was followed by people who lived among the ruins in flimsy huts, seemingly after the complete breakdown of civil authority. Eventually, these, too, purged into history. Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is characteristically seen as the heartland, the center of origin of civilization and urban society. It displays a history of political rises and declines that furnishes many examples of collapse. From the competing city-states of the early 3rd millennium BC, Sargon of Akkad developed the first Mesopotamian Empire, circa 2350 to 2150 BC. Its fall some 200 years following establishment was presaged by a series of rebellions in the subject city-states. A period of decentralization followed in southern Mesopotamia. The next period of regional hegemony was established by the third dynasty of Ur, circa 2100 to 2000 BC, which set up a vast regional bureaucracy to collect taxes and tribute. The third dynasty of Ur encouraged expansion of the irrigation system and growth of population and settlement. This attempt to maximize economic and political power led to a rapid collapse, with disastrous consequences for southern Mesopotamia. Over the next millennium or so, there was a 40% reduction in the number of settlements and a 77% reduction in settled areas. Political power shifted to the north, to Babylon. The empire established by Hammurabi, circa 1792 to 1750 BC, did not survive the death of his son. 4 succeeding kings ruled a greatly reduced realm until the dynasty was terminated by the Hittites. Partly coterminously, the Assyrians in the period between 1920 and 1780 BC established widespread trade routes and then collapsed. The Assyrians enjoyed a political resurgence in the 14th century BC and then again in the 9th to 7th centuries. In this latter era, they held a vast empire over much of the Near East, only to lose most of these dependencies and suffer defeat by the Medes in 614 BC. Assyrian social and political institutions disappeared thereafter. After a resurgence by Babylon brought to an end by Cyrus the Great, Mesopotamia was incorporated into successive Near Eastern empires of varying size and durability. Achaemenian, Seleucid, Parthian, Sasanian, and Islamic. There was an irregular but largely sustained increase in the scale and complexity of the agricultural regime, in population density, and in city building. Sometime in the 7th through 10th century AD, however, there was a major collapse in the Mesopotamian alluvium. By the 11th or 12th centuries AD, the total occupied area had shrunk to only 6% of its level 500 years earlier. Population dropped to the lowest point in 5 millennia. State resources declined precipitously. In many strategic and formerly prosperous areas, there were tax revenue losses of 90% or more in less than a single lifetime. People rebelled and the countryside became ungovernable. By the early 10th century, irrigation weirs were nearly all confined to the vicinity of Baghdad. It's described in the quote that heads this chapter. The basis for urban life in perhaps 10,000 square kilometers of the Mesopotamian heartland was eliminated for centuries. Until the modern era, the region was claimed primarily by nomads. And we'll be back to Tainter tomorrow, beginning with a discussion of the collapse of the Egyptian Old Kingdom. And, oh yes, Afghanistan. A quick roundup on that. Taliban capture Herat and Kandahar as U.S. sends troops to help evacuate embassy staff. From the New York Post, President Biden Thursday ordered a large deployment of troops to help evacuate U.S. embassy staff from Kabul amid rapid Taliban gains in Afghanistan. Yes, the last helicopter out of Kabul. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said that 3,000 U.S. troops are going to reinforce the more than 600 U.S. troops already working at or near the embassy. He said U.S. officials didn't want to wait until it is too late. This is from the New York Times. American negotiators are trying to extract assurances from the Taliban that they will not attack the U.S. embassy in Kabul if the extremist group overruns the capital in a direct challenge to the country's government, two American officials said. The effort, led by Zalmay Khalilzad, the chief American envoy in talks with the Taliban, seeks to stave off an evacuation of the embassy as the fighters rapidly seize cities across Afghanistan. The Taliban's advance has put emissaries in Kabul on high alert for a surge of violence in coming months or even weeks, and forced consulates and other diplomatic missions elsewhere in the country to shut down. This is from the New York Post as well, by Yaron Steinbuch. The Afghan ambassador to the U.S. criticized the Biden administration for suggesting that lasting peace in her country is possible only through a political solution, amid warnings that the Taliban could seize Kabul in as little as a month as American troops withdraw. Ambassador Adela Raz told News Nation Now that the American withdrawal had been quick and has created consequences, but held out hope for her war-torn country with the help of close air support by the U.S., even after ground forces are gone by the end of the month. If I talk about the fall of Kabul, then I'm shattering my hopes, Raz said. I don't know. Perhaps they should have fought a little harder. You know, there was always that possibility. As Machiavelli describes, depending on mercenaries for your freedom, for your sovereignty, is a bad bet. Pat Buchanan has something to say about this. In April, President Biden told the nation he would have all U.S. troops out of Afghanistan by September 11th, the 20th anniversary of the worst terrorist attack ever on the continental United States. Given the turn of events the past week, that 20th anniversary may be celebrated by a triumphant Taliban now on the cusp of victory over the Americans and their Afghan allies, with gruesome public executions of their surrendered and captured enemies. September 11, 2021 could see U.S. Marines and diplomats fleeing Kabul to escape the retribution of the Taliban, whom we ousted in 2001. Some Afghan soldiers have fought bravely. Others have retreated into their bases, surrendered, or fled into neighboring countries such as Iran, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Pakistan. An entire Afghan army corps with its U.S. weapons, equipment, and vehicles was surrendered in Kunduz city. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut has summarized the situation. The complete, utter failure of the Afghan National Army, absent our handholding to defend their country, is a blistering indictment of a failed 20-year strategy predicated on the belief that billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars could create an effective democratic central government in a nation that has never had one. Is it accurate to describe Afghanistan as a nation? I don't think it is. That's my opinion, not Buchanan's. He continues, the reality of that grim assessment raises many questions. Who is responsible for the colossal U.S. failure in Afghanistan? Who is responsible for America's impending defeat in her longest war? Over the last 20 years, the U.S. lost 2,500 troops with 20,000 wounded and invested $1 trillion to create an Afghan army, only to see that army crumble and disintegrate as soon as we departed. Why did we fail? Did the U.S. generals, statesmen, politicians, and journalists who went to Afghanistan during these last 2 decades and came back to testify to our steady progress delude themselves? Or did they deceive us? Well, these generals all got promoted. They created phantom armies that had no one in them. And at the first, hint of danger, they fled. And Canada was in Afghanistan for 13 years. There is a memorial to this blunder, which is across from the Anglican Cathedral in Victoria on Quadra Street. And it's a very strange memorial. It has a relief of a Canadian soldier, tall, bending over and extending a hand to what is presumably an Afghan child. So it must have been a female child, who needed to go to school. and the bad people won't let her. And that's why you have your people killed and you spend all this money and you enrage a whole country over that? Really? A war for feminism is what Afghanistan was, and perhaps it will be an object lesson. But I must say I have my doubts. Although there's a good piece in American Mind by Angelo Codevilla, The Death of the Global Cop, America's Foreign Policy Drowns at the Water's Edge. He concludes that, yes, no serious statesman would display their own country's internal divisions, as does the U.S., by flying the alphabet people flag. It is not reasonable to expect foreigners to take seriously American statesmen who do not take seriously their own country's unity and interests. Euro-American impotence in Europe has left Russia as the only power in the region that pursues what it considers its interests. Russia's Sergei Lavrov is probably the world's most perceptive diplomat today. The combination of U.S. verbal provocations with military deployments that are practical surrenders leaves Poles, Balts, and Ukrainians in an all too familiar bind. Yes, under the current corrupt leadership and bearing the legacy of 2 decades of ignorant wars, the U.S. Army and Air Force can scarcely fight, and the Navy is grossly mal-deployed to the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea, while having given up bases in the Azores and Iceland. What could the U.S. Navy do were China to try conquering Taiwan? Issuing stern warnings while refraining from fortifying the island with serious missile defense is unserious. Serious geopolitical analysis, however, is beyond folks who can think only of denigrating their less sophisticated subjects. Fighting that domestic war of conquest consumes them. Until that is over, discussions of foreign affairs must remain theoretical. I suppose it is a good thing that this empire is coming to an end. But on the other hand, I don't really see much possibility of the Pentagon budget being reduced, of a peace dividend. And I don't really see much chance of the clowns who are responsible for the debacles in Iraq and Afghanistan being dealt with, being cashiered, and perhaps lessons being learned. But here's hoping. I'm going to go to Theater Thursday in just a minute. But before I do, let's go to the chat. Steve says, a core-sized defection is insane. Yakoropoulos says the silver lining of Trump's loss is that this Afghanistan failure is happening on Biden's watch, so they have a harder time turning it into some anti-Trump narrative. That is true, in the same way that we see what's happening with vaccines here. Well, Biden has just gone all in on this, so one could blame Trump and his warp speed for that, but Biden and the Democrats, they don't have that chance anymore because it's tied around their necks now. Ogan's Iron says, anyone know if there's a Bronze Age pervert archive somewhere or where BAP relocated to? Would be great on Gab. Yo Mama says, but if the military-industrial complex is defeated, people will lose jobs. Dionysius says, KMG, how do you think we will have Social Security? Do you mean the government program or? I don't know. I mean, they're going to be coming after pensions soon enough. It's already started happening in some American municipalities. Okay. How long? I don't know. I suppose people tend to think only of themselves in this situation. John S. says, agreed, we're visibly teetering over the abyss to anyone even minimally observant. Your mom says, all this stuff about collapse is why I do not see Western Civ to be the same thing as Greco-Roman antiquity. I forgot there was an actual Arcadian named Sargon who probably did not need more dopamine, says No Sleep Till Breezewood, Pennsylvania. Sargon later became a YouTuber and single-handedly brought down UKIP, says Yo Mama. John S. says, I intend to go back and snip these tainter sections out to make a KMG narrated audio book. Get that Odyssey account set up, Kevin. We don't want all these gems lost, like tears in the rain. Yakaroi Paula says, in general, a lot of people in the coalition against core Heritage America will be shocked at what happens when core Heritage America actually loses its loyalty and patriotism. Okay. Theater Thursday. We are going... I've talked about several movies made by the Archers. This was the team of Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. Powell was a director and writer. Pressburger was producer and writer, but they gave their movies joint credit. They made over a dozen movies, some of which are very famous. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, which is one of my favorites. Canterbury Tale, I Know Where I'm Going, A Matter of Life and Death. Black Narcissus, which has been unnecessarily remade for TV. And later, The Small Back Room, a beautiful version of Offenbach's The Tales of Hoffmann. The Battle of the River Plate, Ill Met by Moonlight. And this was their manifesto. We owe allegiance to nobody except the financial interests which provide our money, and to them the sole responsibility of ensuring them a profit, not a loss. Every single foot in our films is our own responsibility and nobody else's. We refuse to be guided or coerced by any influence but our own judgment. When we start work on a new idea, we must be a year ahead, not only of our competitors, but also of the times. A real film, from idea to universal release, takes a year or more. No artist believes in escapism, and we secretly believe that no audience does. We have proved, at any rate, that they will pay to see the truth for other reasons than her nakedness. At any time, and particularly at the present, the self-respect of all collaborators, from star to prop man, is sustained or diminished by the theme and purpose of the film they are working on. This is a very apposite time to discuss The Red Shoes, which was originally released in 1948. This is from Yahoo News. Criterion has unveiled its first 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray releases with a 6-film slate that includes Citizen Kane, Menace to Society, The Piano, Mulholland Drive, The Red Shoes, and A Hard Day's Night. There were some eyebrows raised about some of those choices, particularly Menace to Society and The Piano. While we wait for those people who have 4K, I can talk about available releases. And there are rival versions by ITV in Britain, which is a Region 2 locked, and the Criterion version, Blu-ray, which is Region 1 locked. As far as the movie itself goes, they're pretty much the same in terms of quality, but Criterion wins because of the outstanding extras, especially a commentary by Ian Christie, Marius Goring, Moira Shearer, Jack Cardiff, Brian Easdale, and Martin Scorsese. Now, it's entirely right to discuss Martin Scorsese because this is one of his famous films. Michael Powell ended up marrying Thelma Schoonmaker, his longtime editor, and it was Martin Scorsese who pretty much rescued this film from the scrap heap. That he led the charge to raise the money, resulting in the digital restoration of The Red Shoes. And of course, anyone who had seen this movie on television for decades might have wondered what the fuss was about. But now the glory of this film in 3-color Technicolor is now available to the whole world. And of course, it is indeed a revelation. Now, this film is about art. It's unabashedly about art. And Why a film about art? In 1948, Michael Powell said, for 10 years, we had all been told to go out and die for freedom and democracy, but now the war was over. The Red Shoes told us to go out and die for art. Ironically, the movie was much more successful in the United States than it was in Britain. Part of the reason for this is that the film was financed by J. Arthur Rank and the Rank Organization, and they lost confidence. Rank lost confidence in the film, which went over budget, and they were appalled by the great set piece in the film, which I will get to. They did little to promote it, and it died on the vine, and this is what led to Powell and Pressburger severing their ties with the Rank Organization. I said that this, this film is about art. It's about, I suppose, it's the glory of art, the beauty of art, and the terror, the horror of art. This film is many things. It's about a love triangle. It's about the sacrifices which are necessary to be a great artist, about the conflict between art and, well, a quotidian life, if you will. It is, of course, based on a famous fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. And the fairy tale is a sort of cautionary tale for women about the price of vanity. That the red shoes are a metaphor for getting caught up in vanity, and that it seizes control of your life to the detriment of what should be a woman's duties. I know, not very feminist. This is how Boris Lermontov, who is the impresario, troupe Ballet Lermontov, says the Ballet of the Red Shoes is from a fairy tale by Hans Andersen. It is the story of a young girl who is devoured with an ambition to attend a dance in a pair of red shoes. She gets the shoes and goes to the dance. For a time, all goes well, and she is very happy. At the end of the evening, she is tired and wants to go home, but the red shoes are not tired. In fact, the red shoes are never tired. They dance her out into the street. They dance her over the mountains and valleys, through fields and forests, through night and day. Time rushes by, love rushes by, life rushes by, but the red shoes go on. What happens in the end? Oh, in the end, she dies. So let's look at this question of art here, based on some quotations from the film itself. Lermontov there's an attempt to insinuate a young ballerina into his life, and quite possibly into his ballet troupe. Her name is Victoria, or Vicky Page, and Lermontov is not having this. In fact, he is invited to a high society party. Vicky Page comes from obviously a rich aristocratic family. Her aunt is a countess. And oh yes, rich people, titled people, and their tiresome children or relatives with artistic ambitions, Lermontov asks Vicky Page, "Why do you want to dance?" And she responds, "Why do you want to live?" And he's quite taken aback. And she says, "Well, I don't know exactly why, but I must." And Vicky Page says, "That's my answer too." Lermontov says you cannot have it both ways. A dancer who relies upon the doubtful comforts of human love can never be a great dancer. Never. Don't forget, a great impression of simplicity can only be achieved by a great agony of body and spirit. He's made it clear to Grisha, who is one of the main male dancers, again, his opinion of love, that it is fatal for a ballet dancer And Grisha says, you can't alter human nature. And Lermontov says, no, I think you can do even better than that. You can ignore it. Now, I suppose it would be tempting to look at Lermontov's character, and particularly the superbly controlled performance by Anton Walbrook, who, as you know, is one of my most favorite actors, and conclude, as someone says in the film, that he's a cold, talented monster. He's not cold at all. In fact, if you pay attention, you realize that he is such a romantic. He is so overflowing with emotion that he must clamp down on it rigidly in order to avoid, well, I don't know, falling apart. Let's talk a little about the cast. And Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger decided, quite rightly, that rather than finding actors who could dance, they would find dancers who could act. And it worked, especially in our lead, Victoria Page, who was played by Moira Shearer. This was her first film performance. She was 21 years old. She was a rising ballet star when she was approached by the Archers. Because she didn't take the movie seriously, and she thought that it would be seen as disloyal to her ballet troupe. And there was something which actually parallels the film. And there was a great deal of manipulation of her emotions by the head of the troupe that she was in. Oh, should I let her do this movie or not? Shouldn't I? Well, eventually she did it, and it made her a star. One of the advantages of this film, the restoration of this film, is that one can truly appreciate simply how stunning Moira Shearer was. A remarkable woman. I mean, you know this cliche, flame-haired woman. Well, yes, it's actually true in this case. We have, as I mentioned, Anton Walbrook playing Lermontov, and he is, everything about this movie technically is astounding, and the costuming. I mean, Walbrook seems to have, I don't know, 10 different looks, and he's immaculate in every single one of them. And of course, when I was talking previously about Walbrook, that his performances are greatly assisted. I was talking about him in La Ronde, which I talked about a few weeks ago, that Walbrook was pretty much the handsomest man alive. So this, lent a great deal of distinction. And we have famous ballet dancers, Leonid Messine, who plays Grisha, and he choreographed the Red Shoes dance. We have Robert Helpman, and we have Ludmila Charina, who was a real-life prima ballerina, a woman of remarkable beauty herself. The cinematography is by Jack Cardiff, who worked a lot with the Archers, and this is three-strip Technicolor, huge, bulky cameras, very difficult to manipulate. Someone from Technicolor having to be on set at all times. Technicolor is a type of heightened reality. The colors really pop, but not in a particularly realistic way. Also, the Technicolor process results in images which are not particularly sharp. They're bright and beautiful, but not sharp, which lends Technicolor to movies about fantastic subjects. For instance, this film or Hitchcock's Vertigo. The music is by Brian Easdale. He won an Academy Award for it. And the costume or art direction is simply astounding. Well, you know, there's a famous saying, you know, what do you, Jean Cocteau was asked, you know, what he looked for in art. And Cocteau said, astonish me. And this is what we get in The Red Shoes. There is nothing like this really ever been seen on the screen before. This is not a process movie. I think that process movies are boring. There's a movie about ballet called The Turning Point, which directed by Herbert Ross and starring Shirley MacLaine. And did you know that ballet is hard work? Did you know that it's strenuous? That it requires great discipline and skill and practice, practice, practice? Yeah, I knew that. But what we get in The Turning Point is lots of footage of people practicing, which is boring. We see scenes of people practicing in The Red Shoes, but it is taken for granted that ballet is strenuous and difficult, because, you know, who could doubt it? The movie begins at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, which is right next to the famous open-air market, which is not there anymore. And I suppose for me, at any rate, it leads to nostalgia for a place and a time I never lived in. We see students, and they are eager to attend a performance of a ballet, and they are practically knocking down the doors. And they are all wearing suits and ties, or at least jackets and ties. And the women are dressed, well, prettily. But they care about art. So we have the famous ballerina who is appearing, which appeals to the Irina Boranskaya, which appeals to the ballet crowd. But we have the premiere of a new musical score, which appeals to the music student crowd. And Marius Goring plays the student Julian Craster. And what sets the plot in motion is that he is appalled to discover, starting from the overture of this work, that his professor has stolen the work from him. There's a great little scene right at the very beginning, which, you know, illustrates, you know, how Michael Powell looked at life. He loved women. He loved female beauty, and he loved to express it on film. And there's a short scene where we have Julian Craster and a female friend who may or may not be a girlfriend. And next to them are the two ballet snobs. And one of the men has a beard, so, you know, he's really serious. And there's this woman sitting next to him, another redhead, rather stunning woman in her own right, with a posh cut glass accent, who goes at it with Julian Craster. How can he not know of the great Boranskaya, etc., etc., etc.? So Craster decides that he cannot let this pass. And so he writes a letter to Boris Lermontov saying or claiming that I wrote a piece of music and this was plagiarized for what we heard last night by my professor. And he is desperately trying to see Lermontov, and he's been denied entry by Lermontov's aide, Dmitri. Finally, Lermontov lets him in, and he says, please give me back the letter. And Lermontov says, It's too late. I've already read it. And Lermontov explains to them, that you should not, you should not write letters like this. You get yourself into trouble, and that it is better to be someone who is stolen from than someone who must steal because they lack talent. So play me something, Lermontov says. And Craster does. And Lermontov is impressed. And he says, would you like a job? It's not much. A répétiteur, ballet pianist, only £8 a week and expenses, but Craster is absolutely delighted by this. It's the first professional job in music. Later, Lermontov gives him a score for a new ballet called The Red Shoes. And he says that there's some of it is good, some of it is bad. I've marked the passages. I want you to replace them. And this, he doesn't take this very well, because essentially he's going to be, writing half of a ballet score, but he's not going to get any of the credit for it. So he shows up with his changes, and Lermontov starts complaining about, the parts that he didn't rewrite. And he says, how soon can you get to that? And Krasner, who's a clever fellow, hands him the manuscript. He's already done it. Obviously, he wanted to do it for his own purposes, but he wanted to be ready. And so when can it be orchestrated? Yesterday. So he gets to work on that as well. So he is going to be the composer of a score, which is going to feature in a new ballet by the great ballet Lermontov. So things are looking up for Craster. Meanwhile, after the conversation at the Countess's party, and it's rather ambiguous, as to what Vicky Page's future is going to be, or whether she's going to have one, Lermontov shows up at a smaller ballet, the Mercury Theater, in the pouring rain, where they have no orchestra, where they play records. And he's gone to check her out. And she sees him in the audience, and she's absolutely thrilled by him. And she is dancing for him. And he decides he wants her. He wants her in his troupe. And she moves up quickly, because Irina Borinskaya arrives one day to say that I am fiancée. She's about to be married, and Lermontov is not having that, not one little bit. She must go. And there's a lot of tears at the railway station. When she leaves, Lermontov won't look at her, will not even take her hand. She has betrayed him. She has chosen, banal quotidian reality to the glory of art. She is a traitor, as he sees it. Lermontov asks Vicky Page, how would you like to dance the lead in my new ballet? And on the one hand, she's thrilled by this. On the other hand, she is terrified about whether she is up to it. We see many sides of Boris Lermontov in this film. We see him as a tyrant, but we also see how good he is with the people that he works with. Well, most of the time, how solicitous he is. There's a rather amusing scene of first night jitters, where Grisha is losing his mind. He's a close to hysterical fellow to begin with. And Vicky Page doesn't think that she can do it. And he has said, you've done it all of these times before for me and for the others. I can't remember what my cue is. Well, you'll remember the cue when you hear it, etc., etc., etc. And he manages to calm everyone down, because he does, Lermontov does everything that is necessary to run a ballet troupe at the very highest level of quality. Meanwhile, Vicky and Julian Craster have been spending a lot of time together. They've been forced together by Lermontov. that I'm going to, every time you eat, 3 times a day, you're going to eat in my office, and Mr. Craster is going to play the score. So you will know it. You know, it will be inside you. And so a friendship forms, and then it gets deeper than that. A love affair begins, but it must be kept secret. And they're a very handsome couple, I must say. There's a very charming scene in Monte Carlo. The film is shot mostly in Monte Carlo and on the Côte d'Azur, where they're in a buggy, an old-fashioned horse and buggy, and the driver has fallen asleep. He's just slumped over and sleeping, but the horses know where they're going. You know, they're in no hurry. And Vicky wants to know where they are. And Julian says, no, you wake up the driver, you know. And Craster says, one day when I'm old, I want some lovely young girl to say to me, tell me where you were in your long life, Mr. Craster, where you were most happy. And I shall say, well, my dear, I never knew the exact place. It was somewhere on the Mediterranean. I was with Victoria Page. What? She will say. Do you mean the famous dancer? I will nod. Yes, my dear, I do. Then she was quite young, comparatively unspoiled. We were, I remember, very much in love. And a chill runs down one's spine hearing this, because it sounds very much like an elegy, doesn't it? And it turns out that it is. This movie is not going to be much of a surprise to people who know Hans Christian Andersen's story. It is not as violent or grotesque as Andersen's story. But I don't think that, very many people could be cheated by the ending of it. I suppose some people are. I as I suggested earlier, I suspect that most of the criticism of this film will come from feminists now, that a woman is supposed to choose between a man and her art. Why can't she have both? Well, I suppose some pull it off, not very many. For the reason that only women can have children and men can't. I mean, it is really that simple. Lee Ritchie's is a sensation. It's a worldwide sensation. And Vicky Page does all of the great ballet roles. And she thrills the world, but she's keeping this secret from Lermontov. Everyone else in the troupe knows about it, and it is revealed to Boris at a birthday party on the beach for Grisha. And they're all very amused that he notices that Vicky isn't there, but he does not notice that Julian is not there. Now, of course, contemporary critics, yes, they have to give us the gay slant on this, that, it was actually Julian that Lermontov was obsessed with. No, I'm sorry, that doesn't fly. As I just said, all the ballet troupe there, a happy little family is there on the beach, and immediately Lermontov, where's Vicky? Where's Vicky? Don't you notice that someone else is missing? No, who? So he's not that interested in Craster, except as a composer and conductor, someone who can be useful to him. So they tell him there's a grand love affair between the two, and we see some tremendous acting from Anton Walbrook, where he's perfectly still and just acting entirely with his eyes. But you can just see that he is seething. He's seething. And he won't have it. He simply won't have it. That Craster has to go. And Vicky decides to go with him. And they move back to London. And he works on writing an opera. I should describe the great set piece, perhaps the greatest set piece in cinema history. And it just shows the audacity of Powell and Pressburg. That in a mainstream movie, a movie which was supposed to be a hit with the British public, they insert in the middle of it a 17-minute ballet sequence. Now, a few things about that. Ballet is ephemeral by its nature. And Craster says he doesn't consider ballet to be, a major art form, and frankly, neither do I. I think it started off as a divertissement at the Paris Opera, and then, as I like to joke, it got too big for its capriccios. It's ephemeral because, novels, poetry, etc., short stories, there's the text. If you want to look at music, well, we have the recordings, both AV and simply audio, but even before then, there was the score. Now, the text of a play is not going to be the same as it is when it's performed, but in terms of how good it is, leaving aside the vagaries of staging and acting, well, there is the text. There is no text in ballet. Now, presumably someone has written down the choreography somewhere, but this is not the sort of thing that trades hands. Similarly, I used to wonder that when ballets started appearing on DVD and then Blu-ray, that we'd see a tremendous amount of interest in them from ballet enthusiasts. And as far as I can tell, there isn't much. Like the fact that it's ephemeral. It's also glamorous. It's experienced once and never to be repeated, not exactly in the same form. So there had been ballet on film before, and there'd been ballet on film afterwards. But when compares ballet to a film, well, you're looking at a stage, and the stage has a set, and it's filled with dancers who move about. But the only difference in perspective that one can get is a question of how close you are to the stage or how far away you are from the stage, or whether you're on the left side or the right side, say. Of course, with film, you can move the camera in, you can move the camera back, you can point the camera up, you can point the camera down. You can make things happen that would not happen in actual ballet, and a lot of professional ballet people were very upset by the red shoes, and they continue to be upset today, because what you see in this stupendous scene are things that are physically impossible for a ballet dancer to do, and also things which are just physically impossible. I've joked before that I would probably like ballet if ballet dancers could actually fly as they do in the red shoes, or appear in two places at the same time, or have the power of transmogrification, as we see. And it's a film within a film, but it's very much a psychodrama, because we see her torment being played out, the rivalry between Craster and Lermontov, represented several times. Very cleverly, we see how unified it is. We had seen Vicky looking at a piece of a newspaper, two pages from a newspaper that were floating in the wind, and there's a story about Lermontov, and then we see that. We see that first shown in cellophane, and then in a newspaper, and then the suitor, he becomes the newspaper man, reflecting the fame which Vicky will find. And we see the ephemerality, I suppose, of human existence, with people disappearing and reappearing in different guises. And of course, The Red Shoes is a horror story, and this scene is it's a horror scene, and it ends with the red shoes having to be removed because the dancer who's been possessed by the shoes is dead. There's an awful lot of foreshadowing in this film, including, simply of a train, of a locomotive. And you kind of wonder about that shot and how that is going to pay off. But it does. Now, he can't get over it. Boris cannot get over the fact that he has chased away perhaps the greatest, or a woman who would become the greatest ballet dancer, prima ballerina. And we see there's a great scene where he's alone. Well, so many of the scenes are just so breathtaking. At Monte Carlo, Lermontov has a chateau. It has a stone staircase. It must be close to 100 stairs, and they're all overgrown with weeds. It's like it's a medieval castle. The sumptuous world in which he lives, his sumptuous office. And after Vicky has gone, he keeps repeating the word fool, fool, fool. And of course, we don't know whether he is referring to Vicky Page or whether he is referring to himself. And it's never really made clear. But he wants her back. We see Vicky and Craster in their apartment in London, in their separate beds. And then he hears a woman's voice singing in his head. And this is the opera that he's writing. He's come up with a new aria for it. So he quietly gets out of bed and walks into the adjoining room where there's a grand piano. And he starts working on his opera in the middle of the night. And Vicky notices this, and she goes over to him and listens to it. And they have a touching moment. And then she goes back into the bedroom, and she opens the bottom drawer where there are her ballet slippers. And you see in amongst them the red shoes. She goes to Paris to visit her aunt, the Countess. And what do you know? The Lermontov Ballet is in Cannes, and Lermontov arranges to bump into her at the train station, and he says to her, "You only have to say the word, and you'll be back." Well, she can't really be a wife to Julian Craster if she's traveling the world with the ballet Lermontov, can she? Well, I referred to vanity earlier. Everyone who appears on stage or screen is vain. And it enacts a cost. And one of the costs is typically an inability to sustain normal human relationships that are not professional. And Vicky has essentially abandoned her marriage. Julian isn't about to give up on her. And in fact, Lermontov has retired the red shoes. He says that no one could ever dance it but Vicky. And so it is revived. And on that very same night, the opera by Julian Craster is going to have its premiere at the Royal Opera House. And it's to be broadcast live over the BBC. And Craster doesn't show because he has deduced that Vicky has decamped to the south of France, and he is determined to get her back. And we have a wrenching scene in which both men are pleading, for Vicky, who is driven mad by this. She eventually decides through her tears that she's going to dance. She must dance. Julian leaves to go back to London. I'm not going to spoil the ending for you if you haven't seen it, but let's just say that life imitates art. This is the type of movie that Martin Scorsese was talking about when he attacked the Marvel movies as amusement parks. This movie is about life and love and art and obsession and it is an overwhelming experience. And this is why we should be so grateful that it has been restored. And now we can see it in such a manner as the audiences of 1948 did. There would be very few movies or films that I've ever seen that I would rate higher than The Red Shoes. Maybe only 4 or 5. It's just astonishing. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let's see. Let's have a final look at the chat. How can we know the dancer from the dance, says Anrun. Star Rover says this Red Shoes could not be made today without drastic changes to make it conform to modern PC dictates. Cast composition is one thing unacceptable today. That is true, especially since this is a thing, that Black people are tremendously discriminated against in ballet. I shouldn't think that there are very many Black people interested in ballet. I'll tell you a story to illustrate the hold of ballet on some people, particularly women. My foster mother was herself a répétiteur for the Maria Lewis Ballet Company in Vancouver. And I was talking to a professor I knew at the University of BC, and he told me that his daughter was one of Maria Lewis's students. And he told me, I think that if Maria Lewis told her students to kill their parents, to steal their valuables, and bring them to me, they would do it. This is the hold that ballet has on some young women. Texas Feral Hog says feminists need to be constantly verbally attacked severely. Everything they say should be analyzed and condemned. Later, Marius Goring later played Hindenburg alongside Michael Bates's Ludendorff in the final 2 episodes of Fall of Eagles. Okay. What else do we have here? Who are we talking about? Who is sanctimonious? Do ballet dancers get married one day and families? Do they become too damaged? A lot of them, the modern ones, have serious drug problems because they tend to injure themselves a lot. I suppose another reason is, I don't know, what ballet is associated with New York now and famous people like cocaine, So I've read many such cases, as Donald Trump would say. Okay. Is anyone more overrated than Leonard Cohen, says Dan Allison. I don't know. I quite liked him. Popcastle 88 says Turning Point held a record for a long time for a movie with most Oscar nominations and no wins. 0 wins for 11 noms. The Turning Point is one of those movies that they call Oscar bait. Oh, a prestigious production such as this, directed by Herbie Ross, with Shirley MacLaine. Boy, gonna get a lot of nominations, Okay. I think that's it. That's it for today. Tomorrow is the book club, and I am going to be discussing a book that is about fear. It's called The State of Fear by Laura Dodsworth, and guess what? It's about COVID-19. It's really excellent stuff. So I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it. If you click on the like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, thank you for those who have recently sent in donations. I really could use some money at this time. If you'd like to make a donation, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And once again, if you are kind enough to do so, I would ask that the skill testing question be, where do you live, or what city are you in? Because, you know the answer and I know the answer. So there's no possibility of disappointment when, as happened twice recently, it doesn't go through. As always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.